Okay, so have you ever felt like, you're just bombarded with information?
Like drowning in it. Right.
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
Articles, podcasts, opinions, everywhere you look online.
But sometimes you still feel like you're missing that one crucial insight, the thing that shifts your whole perspective.
That's exactly the feeling. Like you're doing all this input, but not quite getting the output you need.
And that's where we come in with the deep dive. You bring us the source material, those dense books, research papers, anything really.
And we really roll up our sleeves and dig in.
Unpack the ideas, find those unexpected nuggets of wisdom.
And maybe even have a little fun along the way.
Right, exactly. Make it engaging even when the topics get a little, intense.
Definitely. So for today's deep dive, we're going to be exploring this fascinating book, Multipliers.
Oh, this is a good one. It really gets into the heart of leadership and how different styles impact the people around them.
Yeah. And, we've all experienced it, right?
Definitely. You work with some leaders and you feel like your intelligence is just being drained, like you can't contribute your best.
Totally. But then you have those other leaders, the ones who somehow make you feel smarter, more capable.
They make everyone around them better. That's the essence of this book. Understanding the difference between diminishers and multipliers.
Right. So the mission for this deep dive, should you choose to accept it,
I love it.
is to really understand the impact of these two contrasting leadership styles.
And most importantly, to take away practical strategies that you can actually use.
Whether you're leading a team, working within a team, or even just navigating your own career.
Because these principles apply everywhere. So are you ready to dive in?
Let's do it. This book opens with a pretty startling statistic, one that really sets the stage for the whole discussion. It says that something like 99% of people believe that the workforce has significantly more capability than their jobs actually demand.
Wow. 99%. That's practically everyone.
Right. And it really gets you thinking because you constantly hear about this pressure to do more with less.
Always lean and mean, right?
Exactly. Yet the vast majority of people feel like they're actually underutilized.
That's the paradox, isn't it?
Yeah. So the book is arguing that the problem isn't necessarily a lack of talent or resources, but a lack of access to them.
It's like having a treasure chest full of gold, but you only ever use a few coins.
And the organizations that can figure out how to unlock all that potential, well, they're the ones that are going to thrive.
No doubt about it. In today's competitive landscape, that's the real game changer.
Okay, so we've identified this fundamental challenge of untapped potential. Now, the book offers a pretty compelling framework for understanding why this happens.
Yeah, it comes down to these two opposing leadership styles.
The diminishers and the multipliers.
Diminishers, as the name suggests, they kind of suck the intelligence out of the room.
They make people doubt themselves, hold back their ideas.
Exactly. And multipliers, well, they do the opposite.
They energize people. They make them feel like they can achieve anything.
And the impact on performance is huge. The book talks about this multiplier effect.
Where multipliers actually get double the output from their teams.
Just by leveraging their intelligence more effectively.
Versus the traditional approach, what they call the logic of addition.
Which is basically just throwing more resources at a problem. More people, more money, more time.
And we all know how well that usually works, right?
Right. And the book makes it clear, this multiplier approach isn't just about being nice or soft.
It's a strategic approach focused on results.
Hard-edged, even. But it's about achieving those results by truly unlocking people's capabilities.
All right, so we've got the problem. We've got the two contrasting styles. Now, the book breaks down how multipliers actually operate into these 5 key disciplines.
So if you want to become a multiplier, this is the roadmap.
The talent magnet, the liberator, the challenger, the debate maker, and the investor.
Each one focuses on a different aspect of leadership.
So let's unpack each of these, starting with the talent magnet. What's the core idea here?
Well, talent magnets are incredible at spotting and attracting talent. They create this cycle of attraction where the best people want to work with them.
So they're not just looking at resumes, they're looking for that spark.
Exactly. They see potential where others might miss it. They recognize that talent comes in all shapes and sizes.
And they understand that traditional IQ tests don't tell the whole story.
Right. They value native genius, those natural abilities that people possess.
The book uses this great example of a generic drug company in Germany, Hexel AG.
Ah, yes. They were really successful, but they didn't rely on hiring big-name talent.
Instead, they focused on finding people with the right skills and interests and letting them flourish.
They had this thing called the amoeba model, where roles were fluid and people could move to where they could make the biggest impact.
It's like instead of trying to fit square pegs into round holes, they just let the pegs find their own way.
Exactly. It's a much more dynamic and organic approach to talent management.
So what about the diminisher in this context? What do they look like?
Well, the book calls them empire builders. They might initially attract talent, but they hoard it.
They use it to build their own power base instead of empowering others.
And that creates a cycle of decline. People get frustrated, they disengage, they end up quitting and staying.
Meaning they're physically there, but mentally checked out.
Exactly. It's a recipe for mediocrity. So if you want to be a talent magnet, the book highlights some specific practices.
Like, for example, becoming a genius watcher.
Yeah, actively looking for people's strengths, even in unexpected places.
And then connecting those people with the right opportunities.
And being willing to remove prima donnas, those who stifle the growth of others, no matter how talented they might be individually.
Because ultimately, it's about creating an environment where everyone can thrive.
Right. And the book makes a really interesting point about the types of people that both diminishers and multipliers initially attract.
Oh, yeah. Tell me about that.
So it turns out that both types often attract the same kind of high-performing individuals, the A players. The difference is what happens after they join the team.
With the talent magnet, those A players continue to grow and excel.
Exactly. But with the empire builder, they get stifled, their potential is wasted.
So it's not just about attracting talent, it's about creating the right environment to nurture it.
That's the key.
All right, let's move on to the second discipline, the liberator. What's the essence of this one?
Liberators are all about creating an environment where people feel safe to take risks and share their ideas, even if they're unconventional.
So it's a high-pressure environment, but also psychologically safe.
Exactly. It's about demanding excellence, but without creating fear.
Which sounds kind of tricky to pull off.
Right. You have to find that sweet spot. But the book gives some great examples of how it's done.
Like the story of Robert Enslin at SAP.
Oh, yes. He was leading his team through the 2008 financial crisis. A very stressful time, right?
Absolutely.
But he managed to maintain a calm and focused environment, which allowed his team to stay productive and innovative.
Instead of panicking and micromanaging.
Right. And the book also mentions Steven Spielberg.
Oh, interesting. In what way is he a liberator?
Well, he's known for creating this really collaborative and creative atmosphere on his film sets. He gets the best out of people by making them feel valued and respected.
And there's that inspiring story about the 8th grade teacher, Patrick Kelly.
Yeah, he created this demanding but incredibly supportive learning environment that helped his students achieve amazing results.
So it's about setting high standards, but also making it safe to fail.
Right, because failure is just part of the learning process.
Yeah.
So what specific practices do liberators use to achieve this?
Well, first, they create space.
They don't dominate the conversation, they listen more than they talk.
Which allows others to contribute their ideas.
Yeah.
And second, they demand the best thinking.
They set high standards and they don't let people off the hook.
But they do it in a way that's encouraging, not demeaning. And third, they generate rapid learning cycles.
They encourage experimentation, they embrace mistakes as opportunities to learn. The book gives an example of Let's Zayob at Microsoft, who was very open about his own past failures.
Which helped his team feel comfortable taking risks themselves.
Exactly. And then, of course, you have the opposite of a liberator.
The tyrant.
Yes. The book has this character named Jenna, who's a classic tyrant.
She ruled through fear and intimidation.
Her team was constantly on edge, worried about making a mistake.
And as a result, they didn't perform well.
People were too afraid to speak up, to share their ideas.
So it's pretty clear that fear is not a good motivator in the long run.
Nope. It stifles creativity and innovation.
Okay, let's talk about the challenger. What makes them stand out?
Challengers are those leaders who don't feel the need to have all the answers themselves.
They're comfortable with ambiguity.
Right. They see their role as framing the opportunity and then challenging their teams to find the solutions.
They're not afraid to push people beyond their comfort zones.
And they trust that their teams will rise to the occasion. The book contrasts this with the know-it-all.
Oh, yeah, the person who always has to be the smartest one in the room.
Exactly. Like Richard, the chess champion in the book.
Who basically treated his team like pawns in his own game.
And that's not very inspiring, is it?
No, not at all. So, can you give us an example of a challenger in action?
Well, the book talks about Shai Agassi at Better Place. He had this really audacious goal of creating a rapid battery switching infrastructure for electric cars.
Which seemed almost impossible at the time.
Right. But that challenge sparked a wave of innovation within his team. They came up with some incredible solutions.
So sometimes setting those seemingly impossible goals can actually be the best motivator.
Exactly. It forces people to think outside the box.
Okay, so what are the key practices of the challenger?
Well, first, they seed the opportunity. They provide enough information to get people thinking, but they don't give them all the answers.
So they spark curiosity without giving away the solution. And then they lay down the challenge.
Right. They set a clear goal, but they leave it up to the team to figure out how to get there.
And finally, they generate belief.
They create those early wins that build momentum and confidence. The book talks about Wangari Maathai's Green Belt movement, which started with something as simple as planting a few trees.
But it eventually grew into this massive environmental movement.
Exactly, because those early successes created belief that bigger things were possible. And the book actually points out something kind of surprising about challenging people.
What's that?
It suggests that asking people to take on really difficult challenges, when done right, can actually create more psychological safety than asking for something easier.
So there's something about striving for something really ambitious that brings people together.
That's the idea.
All right, let's move on to the debate maker. What's their superpower?
Debate makers are masters of driving sound decisions through rigorous and inclusive debate.
So they're not afraid of conflict.
Not at all. They see it as a way to get to the best possible solution.
Instead of just making a decision in a vacuum.
Exactly. They want everyone to be involved in the process so they understand the rationale behind the decision.
And they're more likely to buy into it.
Right. And the book contrasts this with the decision maker,
Who just makes the call and moves on.
which can lead to resentment and resistance down the line.
So can you give us an example of a debate maker in action?
Well, the book compares the leadership styles of George W. Bush, who was known for making quick gut instinct decisions, with Barack Obama, who was much more deliberate and inclusive in his approach.
He really valued hearing different perspectives.
Exactly. And the book also mentions Lutz at Microsoft Learning, who intentionally engaged his team in a big strategic debate.
And Sue Siegel at Affymetrix, who used debate to navigate a really challenging product recall decision. So what are the key practices of the debate maker?
Well, first, they frame the issue. They ask the right questions to guide the discussion.
And then they drive rigor.
They insist on facts and data, they challenge assumptions, and finally, they create safety for diverse thinking.
They make it okay to disagree.
Exactly. They encourage people to share their perspectives, even if they're unpopular.
And the book makes a really interesting point about debate.
What's that?
It says that, contrary to what you might think, rigorous debate doesn't actually break down teams.
It strengthens them.
Because it forces people to really listen to each other and understand different perspectives.
And ultimately, it leads to better decisions.
All right, let's get to the final discipline, the investor. What's the focus here?
Investors are all about empowering their teams to take ownership and accountability.
So they're not micromanagers.
Definitely not. They believe in giving people the freedom to succeed, but also the responsibility for their outcomes.
Which can be really empowering.
Right. It builds confidence and independence. The book shares this great story about Larry Gelwicks, a high school rugby coach.
Oh, tell me about that one.
So he had this incredibly successful rugby team. But instead of dictating their training regimen, he empowered his team captains to figure out how to improve their fitness.
Wow, that's interesting.
And it worked. They won a national championship. The book also mentions Elaban Bhatt, the founder of SIWA.
The Self-Employed Women's Association in India.
Yes, that's right. She was very intentional about investing in developing future leaders within the organization.
And then she gracefully stepped aside as they became ready to take on those leadership roles. So what are the key practices of the investor?
First, they define ownership. They're very clear about who's responsible for what.
And they give people the authority to make decisions.
Exactly. Second, they invest resources. They provide training, coaching, and support. But they don't do the work for people.
And finally, they hold people accountable.
They give feedback, they let people learn from their mistakes, but they also celebrate their successes.
And the book had this interesting observation about how multipliers approach details.
Oh, yeah. It turns out that they do get involved in the details when necessary.
But they don't take over.
Right. They ask questions, they offer guidance, but they always make sure that the ownership remains with the team.
So they're not just delegating and then disappearing. They're actively engaged, but in a way that supports the team's growth.
Exactly.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground here. The 5 disciplines of multipliers offer a really powerful framework for thinking about leadership. But the book also makes it clear that anyone can learn to become a multiplier.
It's not some innate quality you're born with.
It's a set of skills and, maybe even more importantly, a shift in mindset.
And the book gives this really inspiring example of Bill Campbell,
Who was a coach and advisor to some of the biggest names in Silicon Valley.
And early in his career, he actually showed a lot of diminisher tendencies.
But he actively worked on transforming himself into a multiplier. So it's encouraging to know that it's possible to change.
Absolutely. And the book offers some really practical strategies for becoming a multiplier, even if you're starting from scratch. They call them lazy way strategies.
Lazy way. That sounds right up my alley.
One of them is to work the extremes.
Meaning?
Focus on neutralizing your biggest weakness and maximizing your greatest strength.
So you don't try to be good at everything. You just focus on what matters most.
Exactly. The book talks about Spencer Kaplan, who used 360-degree feedback to identify his leadership extremes.
And then he focused his development efforts on those specific areas.
Right. Another strategy is to start with the assumptions.
How does that mean?
It means adopting the core belief that people are intelligent and capable.
So instead of assuming that people need to be micromanaged, you assume they can figure things out on their own.
Exactly. And that shift in mindset can make a huge difference in how you lead.
And the third lazy way strategy
is to take a 30-day multiplier challenge.
So you pick one practice from one of the disciplines and you try it for 30 days.
Right. Just to see what happens.
The book mentions Jack Bossity, who focused on becoming a better genius watcher.
And he made a conscious effort to identify and label the unique talents of his team members.
Which sounds like a great way to start. And the book also recommends asking yourself this reflective question on a regular basis.
Oh, yeah. A really simple but powerful question. What could my team figure out and achieve if I just gave them more space and autonomy?
That's a great one to ponder. So the overall message here is that we all have the potential to become multipliers.
And to unlock the amazing potential within our teams and organizations.
And as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a challenge.
Okay, I'm listening.
Think about the 5 disciplines: the talent magnet, the liberator, the challenger, the debate maker, and the investor.
Okay, got them.
Which one resonates most with your current leadership style?
Good question.
Or maybe think about the leaders you've worked with. Which styles have been most effective for you?
I'm thinking.
And then just pick one small thing you can do in the next 30 days to move towards that multiplier mindset.
One small step.
Because even a small change can make a big difference. Remember, the power of a multiplier is in their ability to amplify the intelligence and capability of those around them.
And that's something we can all strive for.
Absolutely.
So go out there and be a multiplier.
Yes. Unlock the potential around you.
You might be surprised at what you discover.
Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive.
Until next time. Bye.
See ya.